where no human beings will be there. Now that is the impact of a global warming scenario all over the world. There are instances which people have mentioned of how it affects agriculture, how it affects irrigation, industry, health, education, skill. I don't want to talk about this because this has been dealt with at length. I may not have the time. But what I want to say is that even economists, development economists who believe in economic growth alone, like Stiglitz, I've spoken about him in this parliament, they have said that currently the three existential crises in this world are inequity, climate change, and form of democracy. Democracy in the form of, institutions of freedom of expression and many other things. But climate change climate change has been specified by him as one of the most important factors of existential crisis, simply because of the fact that economists don't account for it. Economic model, factors of production do not take into account climate-related impact. And therefore, even economists have expressed concern now that the economic growth model has to change. I do not want to get into more theory, but what I want to say is the fact that extreme weather events leading to global warming and many such things has resulted in a very important comment from the climate investment opportunities in India's cooling sector. I must make one thing very important. Despite all the action that we take in India towards changing or towards having a green pathway to growth, the climate change impact world over will continue to impact India. And therefore, India is destined to become a heat trap. And therefore, the biggest problem that would come before the countries which will be affected by climate change, and which is least discussed, since Honorable Minister is there, I would really want to harp on this, is migration, human migration. The modeling done by IPCC, modeling done by University of Chicago, and modeling even domestically have proved that India's heat trap will make it unbearable for people to go to the labor market, to go for factors of production, to go for agriculture. When the labor market itself gets vitiated, it impacts poverty, it impacts agriculture, it impacts every other sector. Sir, the impact of this particular change, human migration, would be affecting not just people within the country, it will impact countries around India. You may see people from Bangladesh coming into India because the sea level over there has risen. You may see people from one state coming to another state. And the climate modeling has also revealed that the global north will become warmer, and the global south, like India, will become extremely hot and so unbearable that the report says that possibly become one of the first, India will become one of the first countries to experience heat waves with temperatures exceeding human survivability limit. They can't survive. So they will have to migrate. And if they do migrate, you imagine the situation of food security in that country, or food security in the new region, energy security in the new region. A humongous proportion, calamity of catastrophic proportions will hit that particular area, and not just India, it will happen all over the world. And since we are giving a direction, we are taking the leadership for a greenway path, it is all the very good, but we have to be prepared to face the consequences of others not doing it, or others having committed historical negligence in allowing green emissions to rise and rise and rise in their quest for economic development. And therefore, I thought I will take this opportunity, since very few minutes are left, to not talk about the impact, really, but to talk more about what are the pathways, and suggest what are the things that probably we should still be doing, which we are not doing, keeping in view the fact that we will still face the trauma, even if we are doing everything well. So the first thing is, we have to move from security to resilience. Food security, energy security, health security would be important, but we have to think about resilience of that system. You may have all the security, but it may not be resilient. When the impact of a heat wave comes, the entire security collapses. So resilience will be the new buzzword. Second, we have to move from mitigation to adaptability. To face those consequences, how do we have to change our life will be something which I'll come to. That is lifestyle changes. But even at a national level, we have to think about changes. We have to move from relief to preparedness. We have to move from local thinking to global thinking, which we are currently doing. We have to look for not only green pathways inside our country, we have to help countries have a green pathway around us also. That is in the SAARC countries, in South Asian countries. We take leadership in that, and G20 provides us that particular platform. We have to move from government to private and citizens. And the life is one such pronouncement which makes it important for all citizens to change their lifestyles, to be adaptable, to be resilient, to face this challenge when it comes over them. I think since the Honorable Minister is there, the House is there, we have to suggest for the private sector, and this I'm making a very concrete suggestion, that the companies law should be amended to change the corporate social responsibility provision to ESG provision. That would include environment, social, and governance. Corporate social responsibility currently includes everything. The private sector needs to have a responsibility in this because everyone is affected. Their own value chains, their own productivity will be affected. We also have to think about modeling and research. So I'll take 2 minutes. Modeling and research. We have to improve our modeling and research. Our ability, Odisha's ability, for example, to handle the disasters has been, one of the factors responsible for it has been better modeling of the movement of air. The climate modeling impacts, the scenarios have to be worked out. Now, I will come to some of the remedial measures. The most important thing we have to do, Honorable Minister is here, is to change, we have a relook at the Disaster Management Act. The Disaster Management Act 2005 has not been revisited. When the pandemic came, we looked around, we looked at the Disaster Management Act, then we looked around the Pandemic Act, which was very old, and therefore we reviewed it and brought a new Pandemic Act. This will be required in every sector. This will be required in agriculture, industry, health, education, every sector. And therefore, I think the Disaster Management Act, since it is governing all other departments, including the states, please revisit it and factor in all other departments' requirements to have built this resilience, not just security. And we must also realize that many of these climate changes are irreversible disasters. They are not cyclones, they'll go away, floods, they will finish. They are irreversible. Therefore, the DM Act has to be looked at because that provides guidance. Second, I think another last point, sir. Every country currently has a scenario planning cell at the Prime Minister's office level. What would happen in different scenarios? What would happen if human migration, if 2 million people start coming to West Bengal or 3 million people go from Pakistan, they come to, let's say, Haryana, Rajasthan. So this scenario planning has to be having the top level commitment. So Prime Minister's office should have a scenario planning cell. It is there in US, UK, Singapore, everywhere it is there. I have been a student in those universities to know that it exists. We should have the same thing at the state level, at the Chief Minister's office level. And lastly, what Odisha has done under Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik's leadership is a small step, but I think it's a giant signal. And that is, you need to have climate atlas for every state, climate budget for every state. Then only you will be prepared to face the disaster in all the departments that will face. The last point, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Patnaik. Your time is over.
The last point, sir, is in all these matters, in climate impact, you would realize that the poor are disproportionately affected and disproportionately impacted. So inequity keeps on increasing, and that is the first existential crisis that Professor Stiglitz was speaking about. So climate change will lead to inequity. So two existential crises will automatically come in. So we have to address all these things during this discussion on global warming. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Honorable members, I have a request from Dr. Sudhanshu Trivedi. He has an emergency, he has to go. So if you agree, I can call Sri Sudhanshu Trivedi.
माननीय उपसभापति महोदय, आज हम जिस विषय के ऊपर विचार करने के लिए एकत्र हुए हैं, ये विश्व की उन समस्याओं में से एक है जिसमें कोई भी देश और कोई भी व्यक्ति ये नहीं कह सकता कि मैं इससे अप्रभावित हूं। अनेक समस्याएं हो सकती हैं, कोई कह सकता है किसी देश पे आतंकवाद का प्रभाव नहीं है, कोई कह सकता है अमुक समस्या मेरी नहीं है, परंतु क्लाइमेट चेंज एक ऐसी समस्या है जिससे विश्व का हर देश और हर व्यक्ति एक समान रूप से प्रभावित है। और इसकी वजह से अगर हम एक बात कहें कि विगत 100 वर्षों में दुनिया ने साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी में इतनी उन्नति की, किसी जमाने में सिर्फ मार्कोनी का सिग्नल गया था, 1900 में पार आज हम वर्ल्ड वाइड वेब पे बैठे हुए हैं, हम सैटेलाइट्स पे बैठे हुए हैं। इतना ही नहीं, सेलुलर माइक्रोबायोलॉजिकल रेवोल्यूशन हो गया, क्वांटम रेवोल्यूशन हो गया। कहा जाता है कि वी आर एट द कस्प ऑफ ए ग्लोरियस एज इन द डॉक्यूमेंटेड हिस्ट्री ऑफ मैनकाइंड। परंतु दूसरी तरफ विगत 100 वर्षों में टेम्परेचर 1 डिग्री बढ़ा है और 5 सबसे गर्म वर्ष पिछले 30-35 वर्षों में रिकॉर्ड किए गए हैं। और इस प्रकार की आशंका है कि अगर हमने कुछ नहीं किया तो अगले 100-150 वर्षों में हो सकता है कि मनुष्य जाति के एग्जिस्टेंस पर ही क्वेश्चन मार्क लग जाए। It never happened in the documented history of the mankind. So we have to decide whether we are at the cusp of a glorious time or at the cusp of a precarious time. हम एक शानदार स्थिति की तरफ हैं या एक खौफनाक स्थिति की तरफ हैं। और इसी पर विचार करने के लिए दुनिया ने सबसे पहले, आप सबको याद होगा 1992 में रियो डी जेनेरो में अर्थ समिट हुई, फिर 1997 में क्वेटो, जो क्वेटो प्रोटोकॉल हम सब जानते हैं, 2009 में कोपेनहेगन हुआ, 2015 में COP21 पेरिस में, और अभी हाल के वर्षों में ग्लासगो, और अभी पिछले महीने ही कुछ दिन पूर्व ही माननीय मंत्री महोदय शर्म अल शेख में जो कार्य करके आए हैं, ये दर्शा रहा है कि पूरी दुनिया और भारत इस विषय को लेकर कितनी गंभीरता के साथ सजग है। परंतु जब हम विचार करते हैं कि समस्या इतनी बड़ी है तो उस पर विचार भी उतना गहन होना चाहिए। मैं स्मरण दिलाना चाहता हूं कि जब पेरिस में जलवायु का सम्मेलन हो रहा था, पूरी दुनिया के खिलाफ प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी ने दृढ़ता से स्टैंड लिया था। तमाम हमारे ऊपर आक्षेप लगे थे कि हम अलग थलग पड़ सकते हैं, परंतु पर्यावरण संतुलन के लिए विकसित देशों के ऊपर एक प्रभावी दबाव बनाने का कार्य भारत सरकार ने किया था। और मैं उसी नवंबर 2015 में मोदी जी का एक वक्तव्य उद्धृत करना चाहता हूं। उन्होंने कहा था, पीपुल एंड प्लैनेट आर इनसेपरेबल एंड ह्यूमन वेलबीइंग एंड द नेचर आर इंडिविजिबल। यानी हम नेचर से अपने को अलग रख के नहीं देख सकते। और आप सोचिए कि आज विज्ञान ने भी बात माना। सिर्फ 60-70 साल पहले अगर आप किसी से कहते कि दिल्ली में फैक्ट्री चल रही है और कनाडा में बर्फ पिघल रही है, तो कोई कहता कितने अनसाइंटिफिक हो, कितनी बेकार की बात कर रहे हो, हीट कंडक्शन के रूल नहीं जानते, कुछ मीटर हीट नहीं जा सकती, हजारों किलोमीटर कैसे जा सकती है। आज ग्रीन हाउस इफेक्ट ने प्रूव किया है कि नॉर्थ और साउथ पोल की बर्फ भी पिघल सकती है, बिकॉज एंटायर अर्थ इज ए सिंगल कॉस्मिक यूनिट। ये वही बात है जो मोदी जी ने कहा कि नेचर और ह्यूमन वेलबीइंग अलग नहीं हो सकती। अब आप देखिए कि जब से हमारी सरकार आई तो इस दिशा में छोटे स्टेप से लेकर क्रमशः उत्तरोत्तर बड़े स्टेप तक किस प्रकार का कार्य हुआ। याद करिए 15 अगस्त 2014 सबसे पहले जब प्रधानमंत्री जी ने उद्बोधन दिया था तो स्वच्छ भारत अभियान की बात कही थी, यह शुरुआत थी। याद करिए नो सिंगल यूज प्लास्टिक, यह अगला स्टेप था। नमामि गंगे, जब नमामि गंगे की बात हुई तो गंगा को पूरी तरीके से क्लीन करना, यह अगले स्टेप की तरफ था। और इतना ही नहीं, जो हमने लक्ष्य 2015 में निर्धारित किए थे उसके लिए भारत सरकार ने ग्रीन स्किल डेवलपमेंट प्रोग्राम बनाया, जिसमें कि वन क्षेत्र में रहने वाले लोगों को स्किल किया जा सके कि वो किस प्रकार से अपनी वन संपदा का वास्तविक संरक्षण कर सकते हैं, जिससे कि जो हमने नेशनल डिटरमाइंड कंट्रीब्यूशन पेरिस में तय किया था उस लक्ष्य को हम प्राप्त कर सकें। और अगला लक्ष्य था सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट ग्रोथ, अर्थात एक ऐसा विकास का मॉडल इसमें प्रकृति के साथ हम तारतम्य बनाकर विकास कर सकें। और इसी के लिए नेशनल बायोडायवर्सिटी टारगेट भी तय किया गया, यानी एक बहुआयामी योजना के साथ इस क्लाइमेट चेंज या इकोलॉजिकल इम्बैलेंस को ट्रीट करने के लिए आगे बढ़े। इतना ही नहीं, जब हम भारत को विकसित देश बनाना चाहते हैं तो ऊर्जा की आवश्यकता भी है, और अगर हम फॉसिल फ्यूल या कोल से ही ऊर्जा की आवश्यकता पूर्ति करते रहेंगे तो कैसी समस्याएं आ सकती थी। तो याद करिए, एलईडी बल्ब का विषय बहुत शुरू में लिया गया और अब तक भारत सरकार 37 करोड़ एलईडी बल्ब्स का वितरण कर चुकी, जो अमेरिका की कुल आबादी से ज्यादा है। बहुत से ऐसे कार्य होते हैं सभापति महोदय जो पूर्ववर्ती सरकारों ने भी सोचा होगा, नहीं कर पाए होंगे। जैसे सोलर एनर्जी में जितनी लंबी छलांग हमने मारी है, उन्होंने भी सोचा होगा, उतनी लंबी छलांग नहीं मार पाए। परंतु कुछ बातें ऐसी होती हैं जो उन्होंने शायद सोची भी ना हो। वो ये था कि एक इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस बनेगा और उसका केंद्र भारत में बनेगा। यह विचार शायद उन्होंने नहीं किया होगा। मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में यह हुआ और आज इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस का केंद्र गुरुग्राम में है। और इसमें हमने अचीव क्या किया है कि इन वर्षों में हम सोलर सेल की कैपेसिटी में तीसरे नंबर के देश हो गए हैं और सौर ऊर्जा के द्वारा वाटर हीटिंग के प्रोसेस में दूसरे नंबर के देश हो गए हैं। और इतना ही नहीं, अभी भारत ने दुनिया में पहला ऐसा गांव बनाया है जो पूर्णतः सौर ऊर्जा पे चलता है, जहां की एक एक घर भी सौर ऊर्जा पे चल रहा है। वो है गुजरात का मोढेरा गांव। और इतना ही नहीं, वहां पर भगवान सूर्य का एक मंदिर भी है। तो वो भावी भारत का भी प्रतीक है और गौरवशाली भारत का भी प्रतीक है। अर्बन फॉरेस्टेशन के लिए नागपुर, रांची और पणजी में फॉरेस्टेशन किया गया और रेलवे का इलेक्ट्रिफिकेशन 80% तक ब्रॉड गेज का पूरा कर लिया गया है 52,000 किलोमीटर के द्वारा, क्योंकि वो एक बहुत बड़ा कंट्रीब्यूटर था इस क्लाइमेट चेंज में। अब जैसा हमारी पूर्ववर्ती वक्ता ने भी बताया, उसके मैं विस्तार में नहीं जाना चाहता कि COP26 में ग्लासगो में प्रधानमंत्री जी ने पंचामृत की बात कही थी कि 2030 तक 500 गीगावाट नॉन फॉसिल एनर्जी, 50% रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी, कार्बन एमिशन 1 बिलियन से कम करना और कार्बन इंटेंसिटी को 45% डाउन करना, नेट जीरो बाय 270। परंतु महत्वपूर्ण बात यह है सभापति जी, कहा जाए वो किया भी जाए। 2015 में हमने लक्ष्य तय किया था कि 2030 तक हमारी नॉन फॉसिल एनर्जी की इंस्टॉल्ड कैपेसिटी 40% हो जानी चाहिए। और मुझे यह कहते हुए हर्ष हो रहा है कि 2022 आते आते 39.91% हो गई है, अर्थात 8 वर्ष पूर्व हमने उस टारगेट को अचीव कर लिया। फिर यदि आप ध्यान करें, जिसका अभी उल्लेख किया गया कि COP26 ग्लासगो में नेचर नाम की किताब है रिटन बाय एरिस्टोटल, जिसमें क्या लिखते हैं वो, ऑल द एलिमेंट्स ऑफ द नेचर आर फॉर द सर्विस ऑफ द मैनकाइंड। सब कुछ प्रकृति हमारी सेवा के लिए। और यही नहीं, उस फिलॉसफी में यह भी लिखा गया, मैन शुड बिकम द पोजेसर्स एंड मास्टर्स ऑफ नेचर, चाहे फ्रांसिस बेकन या रेने डिकार्टे लिखते हो। इतना ही नहीं, यह लिखा गया, मैन शुड बी एबल टू सबड्यू नेचर। और इसीलिए बढ़ते बढ़ते हम उस मुकाम तक पहुंचे थे। हम लोग के जन्म से बहुत पहले की बात है, हमारी किताबों में हमने पढ़ा, जब यूरी गैगरिन स्पेस में गए तो क्या लिखा था किताबों में, मैन हैज कॉन्कर्ड स्पेस, एज इफ स्पेस इज एन एनिमी नीडेड टू बी कॉन्कर्ड। इस विचार ने प्रकृति के दोहन को इस सीमा तक पहुंचाया है कि जिसका आग्रह प्रधानमंत्री जी ने किया था कि हमें नेचर के अनुरूप जीवन जीना होगा, तो मैं स्मरण दिलाना चाहता हूं कि भारतीय परंपरा में, गांव में हम जो जीवन जीते हैं, नेचर के साथ उसका कैसा तदात्म्य है, यदि हमें समझ लें तो हमें शायद बहुत कुछ सीखने की जरूरत नहीं हो। गेहूं की बाली उगती है तो उसके नीचे का जो हिस्सा होता है वो किसको जाता है, पहले पशुओं को जाता है। जो बाली निकाली जाती है दाने, तो पहला दाना किसको जाता है, पक्षियों को जाता है। जब दाने से आटा बनता है तो पहला आटा किसको जाता है, चींटियों को जाता है। फिर गूंथा जाता है आटा रोटी बनाने के लिए तो मछली को जाता है। पहली रोटी गाय को जाती है और अंतिम रोटी कुत्ते को जाती है। इससे ज्यादा प्रकृति के साथ रहने का तरीका किसी को सीखने की जरूरत है। पर दुख की बात यह थी कि हमारे किसान भाई भी जब आंदोलन में बैठे थे तो कोई विदेश की लड़की उनको बता रही थी कि इन्वायरमेंट के साथ कैसे जीना चाहिए, जबकि वो तो हम हजारों सालों से किस तरीके से जीते आ रहे हैं वह हमें समझ में आना चाहिए। और मैं एक कोट करना चाहता हूं, इस सारी समस्या का मूलभूत कारण कहां से आता है। विलियम वर्ड्सवर्थ एक बहुत बड़े कवि हुए अंग्रेजी के, जिन्होंने एक फ्रेज यूज किया, चाइल्ड इज द फादर ऑफ मैन। उसका मीनिंग क्या था, कहा गया बच्चा प्रकृति के अधिक नजदीक होता है और वही हमारा फोर फादर है। तो इसका अर्थ यह हुआ कि अगर हम अपने अंदर के चाइल्ड को देखें तो हमारे पूर्वजों ने यानी फोर फादर्स ने क्या कहा था वह हमें समझ में आना शुरू होता है। और हमारी सभ्यता तो वो है मान्यवर जहां पर की प्रार्थना भी क्या की जाती है, अंतरिक्ष शांति, पृथ्वी शांति, रौषधया शांति, रापः शांति, वनस्पति, औषधि, फूल, पत्ती, अंतरिक्ष सभी का कल्याण हो। परंतु अफसोस की बात यह है कि जब हम इस प्रकार के विचार के साथ आगे बढ़ रहे हैं तो उस टकराहट के कारण वह समस्या हो रही है। इसलिए मैं अधिक समय न लेते हुए सिर्फ यह कहना चाहूंगा कि जो मोदी जी ने कहा कि लाइफ स्टाइल एनवायरनमेंट के अनुरूप होनी चाहिए, आज यदि यह सीख कहीं से आ सकती है तो भारत से ही आ सकती है, भारत की परंपरा से आ सकती है। और आज हम दुनिया में कितनी भी ऊंचाई पर पहुंच गए हों, पर क्या हमने धरती और धरती की वेदना को देखा? तो यह मैं पंक्ति कहना चाहूंगा, आकाश नापने वालों तुम सच सच कह दो, क्या नाप सके हो तुम धरती की मौन व्यथा? जो दोहन की प्यास से दुखी, रक्त प्रकृति की करुण कथा, वो अंतरिक्ष की सुंदरता पर मुग्ध वसुध, वसुध मतलब वसुधा का पुत्र यानी मनुष्य, वो अंतरिक्ष की सुंदरता पर मुग्ध वसुध, पैरों के नीचे सिसक रही रसवती धर। जब तक हम इसको नहीं समझेंगे तब तक हमारे अंदर यह परिवर्तन नहीं आएगा। इसलिए मैं सिर्फ ये कहना चाहता हूं, वी आर द ओनली कंट्री इन द वर्ल्ड एंड वी आर द ओनली सिविलाइजेशन इन द वर्ल्ड which can give an answer to lower down the temperature of the ecological climate and the cultural climate also, because this is embedded in our culture। और हमारी गवर्नमेंट ने आने के बाद उसको उत्तरोत्तर आगे बढ़ाने का कार्य किया है। इसलिए मैं कहता हूं कि यहां पर संपूर्ण विश्व को दिशा देने के लिए भारत की संसद में जो यह विचार हो रहा है, भारतीय संस्कृति के विचारों के अनुरूप हम आगे बढ़ेंगे तो एक नई दिशा समाज को देने में सफल होंगे। धन्यवाद।
Dhanyavad. The next speaker is S. Niranjan Reddy.
Thank you, sir. Sir, may I start my speech by expressing my gratitude to the chair for allowing a short-term discussion, short-duration discussion on such an important topic. Sir, I would also like to compliment Mr. Tiruchi Shiva for provoking this particular discussion. Mr. Shiva is one of the elders in what is informally referred to as the House of Elders. So he's showing us some guidance. I thank him. I'm also complimentary of our minister, Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, who's here showing the seriousness that he bestows on this particular topic. It's also greatly comforting, sir, that we have such an efficient minister who is shepherding India through these difficult times, taking care of our environmental interests. I'm also satisfied, sir, that the winter session of this House started with discussions on two important environmental bills, Wildlife Protection Act and the Energy Conservation Act. Maybe the winter chill and the bad air that comes with it is possibly setting the stage for us to discuss these environmental issues. Sir, I represent the state of Andhra Pradesh, which is particularly vulnerable. Like India as a country itself is more vulnerable to global warming. Andhra Pradesh state, sir, has 975 kilometers of coastline, which is the second largest, and it is on the eastern coast, which is now believed to be at greater risk of global warming than the west coast. We also have three major cities, Visakhapatnam, Kakinada, and Machilipatnam, which have been found to be the first of the cities that may be affected by global warming. It is also a largely farming state, sir, and one of the perils of global warming has been the alteration in food crop patterns, the reduction in the crop growth output. So these are matters of great concern for the state as it is for the country. Sir, I would also like to bring to your notice and to the House's notice, my friend Mr. Amar Patnaik had already mentioned, there was a recent report which mentioned that India is particularly susceptible to any increase in temperature because the temperatures may cross the human tolerance level, and the poorer sections are the ones who are going to be most affected by it. The agricultural biodiversity is also going to be affected, and there is a possibility of a large-scale food crisis that may stare at India after 20 or 30 years because of the reduction of the food output. Sir, having mentioned the problems which have already been spoken to by the other members of the House, a few of the remedial steps that I wanted to suggest was, possibly the government could look at having a disaster resilient infrastructure. My friend Mr. Patnaik had spoken about moving to a resilience strategy and an adoption strategy. One of the suggestions I had for the government was to have a disaster resilient infrastructure with special emphasis on global warming and abrupt flooding, because we have seen these as the immediate consequences of global warming. Sir, we could also look at an advanced warning mechanism which would help people. We could look at a disaster responsiveness program that is prepared for some time to come in the future. So there are also certain micro steps that could be looked at. While there are macro measures that need to be taken, there possibly would be, sir, a few micro steps that may need to be considered. Greece as a country, sir, has designated an officer known as a heat officer. The officer only looks at the aspects of global warming, advises the government on what steps need to be taken during the summer months when a lot of poor people would be subjected to the heat waves. Sir, we could look at having heat shelters, like we have some shelters during cyclone. When we see summer months that are approaching and we see that it's the poorer sections that are going to be most affected, a heat shelter that is prepared well in advance, which could deal with that the few heat days in particular regions when the heat waves cross, could be one of the suggestions I have. Sir, I have another suggestion. The world is moving towards a climate fund where the countries that are more advanced, that contribute more for economic pollution, pay towards this climate finance and climate fund, which is then used for mitigating or for improving situation in the lesser polluting countries. Sir, India as a country is equally diverse. Some states are much more developed. They have much more higher levels of industrialization. They have much more levels of revenue collection, tax collection. They are therefore much more richer, so to say, and they are also contributing more to the economic pollution and the warming within India. One of the ministers from the last speech when we spoke on energy conservation bill hearteningly told us that per capita contribution of India is only 1/3. While it is salutary and India would try to maintain that, I am only saying that if there has to be a climate fund or a climate amount that may have to be collected by the government for addressing these issues, possibly we could look at the world situation where the more polluting and the richer states contribute a little more so that the money could be then used for offsetting these effects in the other places. Sir, I would like to conclude by referring to one old native proverb which says that we don't inherit our earth from our ancestors, we only borrow it in trust from our children. Sir, we have only one planet, as one of the honorable ministers said, and I would think that the government is moving in the right direction, but this is an impending crisis that may need to be addressed a little more seriously and little more urgently. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next speaker is K. Keshav Rao.
We are discussing this subject at a very appropriate time because the budget is right before you within 2 months. So whatever we are trying to tell you, they have been very strategic and they have been very valuable suggestions, but they would take time. But dealing with your own budget, asking for more money is something which is easier. So I would rather welcome this discussion on the eve of your budget. So whatever it is, climate is changing. I'm saying this because we are not indulging any politics now. If there is some shortcomings that we show you, it is not out of any
apathy.
what did you say?
Any apathy, aversion to it.
Do not take me amiss on that issue. It is true that the government of India has a big list of relief measures and things that you have said, including the new fund that you want to create for that. I would say Mr. Patnaik has very rightly said, after this scholastic speech of MAG about the scientific thing, and Patnaik warning us, this climate change, or what you call warming, warming, is something which is not only threatening our lives today, but very civilizational lives. I was going through yesterday, one book is 20 million years ago, the human race, how this dinosaurs came down, went into extinction because of the climate change. Now that is the threat that Mr. Patnaik has detailed out. I would rather say that two things. Rather than saying what exactly is going to be the impact and what exactly is it doing are known to all of us, except saying that it is not going to affect a particular age or particular period, not particular section, but the entire civilization as such, what I said. I would say what exactly we need to do. Shia was telling me that instead of saying what exactly is the statistics, please try to give some measure, some suggestions which are going to help us out. Patnaik ji has given us three sets, three things that are going to challenge you, that are scaring us. He says in the place of security, you must have resilience. In place of mitigation, you have adaptability. In place of relief, you have preparedness. In place of green pathways, lifestyle must be changed. This I would endorse and say that this should be the... Sir, the IPCC report finds that we are radically, unless we radically change our course now, we will be leading towards this end. India is ranked 4th among the list of countries most affected by climate changes in 2015. That is notwithstanding the fact that today only two-thirds of the emission is created by the 10 countries. We are absolutely matters somewhere at 3%. Yet we take the blame. What exactly they should give, the technologies that we expect from the developed countries, that is not forthcoming. That apart, we are not coming out with our own technologies, as Niranjan Reddy has rightly said. We must now think of the resilience development schemes which are going to stand by it. Now today, 1.2 degrees Celsius. Within another 20 years, we would be reaching 1.5, although you promised to fight them. Notwithstanding that 1.5 threat, today as it is, if you allow the things to go on, 60% of our population is going to be affected by this increase, which did not reach 1.5, but reach some disastrous level. Then I would rather say, but at the same time, when I'm suggesting this, we must also think where this emission comes in. 7% of emission is from the Indian side. This has to go down. As Amiji said, wastages or your own energy resources, your, let me say, what you call, the coal that you are using, the burning at Punjab, these things do add to